I'm Terry Helton, and I'm the chair of the Ventura County Interfaith Community. And we'd like to welcome you tonight to the presentation that's going to happen, but I want to give you a little preview. Ventura County Interfaith Community, VCIC, has been in existence since 2005. And you may know us for doing the Feast of Faiths, which is going to happen in October. Is that right, guys? November 5th. And doing forums at the University Series and other forums. During COVID, we discovered that we needed to come up with some new ideas. And so for the last few years, we have been doing presentations of either an individual faith or a forum from speakers every other month, basically. And so this month, we are very privileged to have somebody with us. And I'm not going to do your whole thing tonight, Mike, because people know you. That's why they're here. But what I am going to say, all these events are on vcic.info. That's INFO, Ventura County Interfaith Community.info, but it's vcic.info. And you can see our upcoming events, and you can see previous events. And we've done some pretty marvelous things. Not bragging, but it's pretty cool. And so next month, August 29th, I don't have a flyer at this time, but August 29th, we're actually going to go to Ventura to the Stake Center of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we have speakers who are going to talk about the temple wedding and take a little of that mystery away for all of us who always have wanted to know about it. So keep that in mind. It will be Tuesday, August 29th at the Temple Center, at the Stake Center in Ventura, the actual city on Mills. So we travel around. This is a good thing. So for tonight, we are also going to ask you if you would fill out a survey for us. We have them at the back, and I'll pass them out before we're finished. And filling out a survey helps us know what we're doing right and what we're doing wrong. So we appreciate your time in doing that. And now, I'm not going to hold us up any longer because what we really want to hear is Rabbi Michael Lotker talk to us. So you have many positions in this county. Introduce yourself.
I am the rabbi for the county, and I slept through the towns, looking for the Jews who could use a rabbi around. I love the singing and the praying. Studying Torah is so fine, and the Ventura rabbi is still blessing wine. That's my abbreviation. Okay, yeah, I do a lot of stuff. If there's questions, I can answer them. But I'm very excited to be talking about Biblical Judaism. And this was stimulated by a talk that we had a few weeks ago about the Mayan religion. And we thought we've been doing for years presenting on individual religions, and we thought it would be interesting to have a presentation on an extinct religion. And so that reminded me of something that is really not, it's really misunderstood only by two groups, Jews and non-Jews. And that is the fact that Biblical Judaism, too, is an extinct religion. I was playing actually golf today with a couple of friends of mine who are Jewish, and they were stunned to hear this. And I was stunned to learn this when I started studying Judaism as an adult. So the substance of this discussion, as you will see, is about Biblical Judaism and how it led to Rabbinic Judaism and Christianity, and what is in Biblical Judaism that we no longer do. Some things in Biblical Judaism Jews do, and Christians don't. And some things that were in Biblical Judaism, Christians do and Jews don't. So it's really, I find it very interesting. I always start preparing a talk like this, and I'm wondering, what am I going to do to fill it? And then by the time I get to the end, I'm thinking, what can I do to cut out? So I actually have a lot of stuff here. I'm going to go quickly. If you have questions, particularly questions of clarification, rather than arguing with me, I encourage you to ask them as we go along. And then, of course, we'll have an opportunity for questions and answers afterwards. Okay, so the religion of the Hebrew Bible, we use the term Hebrew Bible or Tanakh to refer to our scripture, because the term Old Testament implies a certain kind of obsolescence. If I was talking about your old neighborhood, your old boyfriend, your old job or something, it's probably something that's not current. For us, the Hebrew Bible is current. It will shock most people, almost all non-Jews and many Jews, that the Judaism that we practice today, which is Rabbinic Judaism, is not the religion of the Hebrew Bible. Biblical Judaism. Biblical Judaism is a beloved ancestor. It is nowhere practiced today. In fact, it cannot be practiced today, as we will see. It gave birth directly to Rabbinic Judaism, Christianity, and inspired Islam. And it specifies 613 commandments, mitzvot, not just 10, we got lots more, in the first 5 books of the Bible. And then the rabbis add thousands more, because why stop at 613? Okay, so back up. Whoa. Oh, I do this every now and again, and I never know how to get out of it. Okay, there we go. Let's see if... So anyway, at one point in time, we had a religion called Biblical Judaism. We're going to talk a lot about Biblical Judaism. And then important things happened in the first century. So on the Christian side of the house, I even have a pointer. The important thing that happens is the arrival of Jesus. And if you're Christian, Jesus isn't just a minister or a rabbi, but is the Messiah, and also understood to be God. Well, if that's true, you need more scripture than just the good old Hebrew Bible. So we have the New Testament. On the Jewish side of the house, we have Rabbinic Judaism. The key event here is the destruction of the temple in the year 70 of the Common Era. We Jews don't say BC, before Christ, and AD, Anno Domini, year of our Lord, but we refer to BCE, before the Common Era, and Common Era. So the key event is the destruction of the Second Temple. And the text then, we have the Hebrew Bible, but we too need more scripture. We'll get a brief introduction to that. And that additional scripture is the Mishnah and the Talmud. Let's see. Okay. Okay. So the Hebrew Bible is an astounding document. So how is it possible that the Hebrew Bible, one book, could give rise to religions as different as Rabbinic Judaism and the 43,000 different forms of Christianity? I'm always very humbled whenever I try and say something about Christianity, reminding myself that there's many different branches of Christianity. And the reason we were talking about this, Hebrew is wonderfully ambiguous. Every now and again somebody gets upset by this. It is a wonderfully ambiguous language, and therefore it gives rise to a wide multitude of interpretations. We'll take a look at that. And also, as written in ancient forms, there are no vowels. So imagine you have the English consonants H and T. It could be hat, hot, hit, hut, heat, hate, and so on. And you don't know. You determine it from context. Usually it's clear, but there are some really interesting cases where it's not clear and different people interpret it differently. Just a sneak one, I'm not going to explain. This is why Moses is pictured with horns, because of this exact problem. And then we're going to translate to other languages, so we have more problems, and so here we are. And I'd love to mention this. I did a lot of business in Israel. I've been a rabbi for 20 years. I was a physicist. I worked for Israeli companies. In Israel, when there are difficult and complex contracts, they cannot write them in Hebrew. It is simply impossible to be that precise in Hebrew, so they write them in English. Okay, we were talking about this too. You can't simply translate the Hebrew Bible. And we discover this problem between word 1 and word 2 of the Bible. The opening of the Bible is Bereshit bara Elohim, usually translated as in the beginning God created. But if we wanted to say in the beginning, we wouldn't say Bereshit, we would say Barishonah, in the beginning. Bereshit is half of an expression. In Hebrew, because I know I have a couple of Hebrew speakers here, it's a smichut, like Torat Emet, and so on. Bereshit is half of an expression. It means in the beginning of, and then according to the laws of Hebrew grammar, we need a noun. But the second word of the Hebrew Bible is not a noun, it's a verb, bara, he created. So, one possibility is God wasn't so good at Hebrew grammar. I have great sympathy for this because neither am I, or English grammar for that matter. Of course, the rabbis would never say that that's the case. So what the rabbis say is God was teaching us, you cannot translate. You cannot translate, you have to interpret. And I believe God put it between word 1 and word 2 of the Bible. For those of us who are a little AD and our attention is wandering, we won't miss it because it's glaring at us. So, from Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, I see I spelled Jonathan wrong, wonderful teacher, former chief rabbi of Great Britain, and one of his books, he says, every text needs interpretation, every interpretation needs wisdom, every wisdom needs careful negotiation between the timeless and the time. So what did the text mean to the people for whom it was written? And if we really believe that God has something to do with this text, then God was teaching us something for all time in the text. And fundamentalism in any religion, Judaism, Christianity, any religion, reads these texts as if God were as simple as we are. And that's unlikely to be true. The Talmud says one who translates a verse literally is a liar, because if you limit that translation to one thing, you're clearly not getting it. So very briefly, I just want to cover the multitude of Jewish scripture beyond the Bible. So here's the Bible. This is the date scholars think that the sections reach their form. Torah, 400 BCE, prophets, 200 BC, writings, 90 CE. But then we have the Talmud. The tradition is that when Moses was on Sinai, God gave Moses 2 revelations, a written revelation, Torah, and an oral revelation, which is never to be written down. And 1,400 years later, when the Jews are being harassed from all sides, the leading rabbi, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, says, if we don't write this down, we're going to lose it. So he writes it down in a text called the Mishnah. And then for the next few hundred years, 2 groups, one in the Holy Land and one in Babylon, are discussing the Mishnah and coming up with all the rules and regulations and laws that we call rabbinic Judaism. And there's more. So we have Rashi's commenting, there's Zohar, mystical text, there's a prayer book, there's codes of law, there's Midrash. You know, this is why this stuff is so much fun. Either it'll drive you crazy, or you can spend your life studying it. Or both. Okay, so I just want to give you an example. So in the Bible, there is a commandment about the Sabbath. So it says, remember the Sabbath, keep it holy. 6 days thou shalt labor and do all thy work. By the way, that's a commandment. We always love the commandment to rest on the Sabbath, but there's a commandment to work. And then it says, the 7th day is the Sabbath of the Lord. Don't do any work. Not you, not your son, your daughter, your manservant, maidservant, cattle, stranger, anybody who's in the gates. Nobody works. So far, so good. We see in the Bible that working on the Sabbath is punishable by death. Okay, pretty interesting. Whoa, there's a lot of light here. Pretty interesting and significant. So what's work? How would you, I'll do a little interactive, but how would you define work? Anybody? Physical exertion, okay. Somebody what? Something that creates product, okay. What about changing a baby's diaper? Does that work? Okay, so does that mean you leave the baby, the technical term is verstunkt, for 24 hours or be put to death? You think? So the question is, how do we define work, but more importantly, how does God define work? You would think if God was so concerned about this, somewhere God would have given us a better hint. And sure enough, God does. So in the Mishnah and the Talmud, there's 39 categories of work, and they're in detail, and you know, this is fun to discuss also, but I'm not going to discuss it. The point is, in the Talmud, we have lots of direction and instruction about what's work and what's not work. Okay, so what I want to talk a little bit about is what are the elements of biblical Judaism. In biblical Judaism, worship, service, only takes place at the temple in Jerusalem, which was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE and the Romans in 70 CE. Service is, in English and Hebrew, is related to the same word as servant, servitude. We call prayer avodah. That's the same word as being a servant or even being a slave. It's serving God. And as you will see in a moment, back in the good old days, we served God breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and the menu is not small. it's actually shocking. It actually shocked me once I started putting all this together. So it requires priests. The Hebrew word for priest is kohen. And there are still people named Cohen. And so they trace themselves through the father's line, not the mother's line, back to Aaron. And there's actually genetic evidence that it's high probability that all the Jews that think of themselves as priests, Kohens, share in their Y chromosome. We can talk about the technology if you're interested, going back to an individual. So it's really interesting. So you need priests. The priests are intermediaries between the people and God. Does this sound familiar to any Christians? They offer us the sacrifices. So there are regular sacrifices 3 times a day with an added one on Shabbat and on holidays. There are special sacrificial services for each holiday. And there are even special sacrifices as personal offerings for well-being or to atone from sin. And now I'm going to go through this quickly. Oh, okay, no, I'm going to continue with this. I am going to show you a wide example of all of these sacrifices. Yes? When you offer something to God.
Okay.
And what would you like tonight? Would you like some meat? Would you like some fish? Would you like some grain? Would you like some liquids? Would you like blood? Blood. We have a special on blood today. Yeah, a lot of blood. Yes. Sorry? Yes, but not prayer. Yes.
What's the difference between a Levite and a Kohen?
So there are 12 tribes. Levi is one of the tribes. And Moses is a Levite, and so is his brother Aaron. Aaron was designated as the first priest, and all the priests are sons of Aaron. So all Kohens are Levites, but not all Levites are Kohens. And as we'll see, I think I mentioned this, in modern Judaism, in traditional Judaism, there are different roles for Levites and Kohen, but much less than there would be in temple times. The Levites basically took care of the temple, took care of the priests. Yeah, it's a very good question. And there's actually even a controversy and fight about who should really be the priests. Book of Leviticus, the Levites seem to be winning, and other books, the sons of Aaron seem to be winning. The first thing that is holy in the Bible is the Sabbath. It says God blessed the seventh day and hallowed it, made it holy. God gives Abraham the land, but the land is not described as holy, even though we call it the Holy Land. In rabbinic tradition, the tabernacle, which is the portable ark carried through the 40 years of wandering, is created only after the incident of the golden calf, when God realizes, hey, these folks need something physical. I can't just be sort of an invisible presence. They need a place. Here we are. We need a place to come, to feel holy, to pray. And so God says, okay, God says, Asuli mikdash v'shalchani mitocham. Make me a mikdash, a tabernacle, and I will dwell among them. Not in it, but among them, among the people. David conquers the city of Jerusalem, but is not allowed to build a temple because he is a man of war. Only his son Shlomo, the Hebrew word Shlomo means his peace, is allowed. And the Ark of the Covenant is like a good luck charm. David schleps it around into battles, and it's captured by various people, and they get hemorrhoids. There's all kinds of interesting stuff that you probably didn't learn in Sunday school about some of these things. So Solomon, his son, builds the first temple about 900 BCE, and it's destroyed maybe a little over 300 years later by the Babylonians at modern-day Iraq. It's rebuilt 80 years later, but it's a pale imitation of the original. Herod reconstructs the temple about 30 BCE, and it lasts about 100 years. It's not considered the third temple. It's really a reconstruction of the second temple. So I know it's going to be a little hard to see. This is Jerusalem. This is the Temple Mount. This is what is called the City of David. If you go to Jerusalem, there's a lot going on in Jerusalem these days. If you go to Jerusalem, it's amazing the tours now that you can see the City of David and the excavations there. Here's another sort of image of Solomon's temple. This is actually the temple, and these are the various courtyards surrounding the temple. So that's the first temple. And then this is the second temple as rebuilt by Herod. Herod was a king of questionable Jewish origin. And yes. Okay, closer to the screen so they can see me. Hi. Herod was basically a governor, a king of Israel, and a governor put in place by Rome. He was a great builder. I mean, one thing, Herod was insane in a lot of ways, but he was a fantastic builder, and he built this huge area called the Temple Mount. And so there's Herod's temple and storage places. And so I want to point out, I'm going to say more about this. It's called Robinson's Arch because an archaeologist named Robinson discovered it and named it. So there's a valley here. I think this is the Kidron Valley. So the town of Jerusalem would be up here. People would walk down, and either they would walk across this bridge, Wilson's Arch, or they would walk across a stairway to get to the temple, or they would go out the southern wall, and they would walk up these steps and go into the entrances over here. So this is actually the area where the western wall is today. There's a wonderful model, very large, I should have waited to have some people in it, of Second Temple Jerusalem. And so this is a nice picture. This is actually the eastern wall, and there's the temple. The doors of the temple face east. This is, again, just some, same thing. This is the western wall. So that's Wilson's Arch, Robinson's Arch, a theater, and a fortress. There's the temple, and there's the gates, and so on. So one of the things I'm fascinated with is Robinson's Arch. So this is Robinson's Arch as it would have existed in Herod's temple time and Second Temple time. And in 1967, when the Israelis captured Jerusalem, this is what Robinson's Arch looked like. You could stand next to it and lean on it. Okay, that's how much stuff over 2,000 years gets filled in. And then this is Robinson's Arch today. There's the arch way up here. Actually, again, I'm sorry there's no people. This is like an egalitarian prayer area, but this is, 50, 60, 70 feet above the ground. This is the excavation that's been done outside the Temple Mount since 1967. We would love to do a lot of excavation inside the Temple Mount, but that's controlled by Muslim authorities, and there's no chance of doing it. Then I mentioned Wilson's Arch. So here it is in the model. It's a big archway supporting a bridge. This is the western wall where people go to pray. And the arch, there you can see how little of the arch is actually above ground these days. And then inside is a prayer area. It's on the men's side, which is really interesting. Okay, and again, this is the western wall as it exists today. Men's side, women's side. This is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, built on the Temple Mount, and a bridge that you would go up to get into the Temple Mount when times are good. And then here's Robinson's Arch over here. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about sacrifices and what kinds of sacrifices are. Yes?
Why is the western wall significant compared to the eastern?
Yes, okay, so yeah, that's a great question. Okay. So let me repeat the question. What's the significance of the western wall? So first of all, these are not walls of the temple. These are retaining walls that supported the Temple Mount. Actually, one of the reasons they needed a Temple Mount is a Kohen, a priest, is not allowed to have contact with the dead. And it was unclear whether that area was used as a cemetery or might have been used as a cemetery. So they built an air gap. There's arches underneath it. So the tradition is that poor people contributed to the construction of the Western Wall, and there's mystical stories about the angels residing there. But in history, you saw how much dirt covered everything. The Western Wall was there through history where people could go to pray. So it was one of the few areas, remnants of the Temple Mount, where people could actually visit. So I'm going to talk about sacrifices, and I'm going to go quickly through this because this hasn't been occurring for almost 2,000 years. So there's voluntary offerings. There's burnt offerings, which is called an oleh, because the smoke goes up, and we're told it makes a pleasing odor to God. God likes barbecues. There's a peace offering. There's meat and cereal offering. There's sin offerings. There's trespass offerings. So what's a sin offering? An ox. The high priest offers an ox. The whole congregation offers an ox. The king or a prince, a he-goat. Common people, a she-goat. Poor people, turtle doves, birds. Very poor, some flour. So depending on what you can give. Common elements of a sacrifice. So you have a place. There's an altar. An offerer, place of the offering, laying of hands, priest, salt, fire, blood. A lot of blood. I don't know if any of you, well, you know what it's like. We are not particularly large animals in the animal kingdom compared to an ox, say. I don't know if you've ever seen, movies, photographs of animals like cows and bulls being slaughtered. There's a lot of blood. They've discovered areas from the Temple Mount where basically there was plumbing to carry the blood away. And in some of the excavation of the soil, they could still find iron and remnants of hemoglobin. And I would sit for hours on the Temple Mount just trying to imagine what that would have been like, particularly for people who didn't regularly have meat in their diet, just the smell of the meat. So there's animals, goats, rams, sheep, lambs, birds, turtle doves, pigeons, grain, unleavened bread. So matzah is not only for Passover. Matzah has a sort of a holy element to it that was used in offerings. Okay, I'm really going to fly through this, but if you want, I can show you the book that this is from. So this is a list of biblical sacrifices. So here is Inner Chatat, sin offerings, the occasions, Yom Kippur, Outer Chatat, Rosh Chodesh, the every month, the new month, personal sin offerings, just elevation offerings, and what type of animal and what gender and so on. Here's other kinds of offerings. I'm not even going to try and make sense of it. Here's bird offerings, where it's offered. Mincha offerings. Mincha is typically grain offerings. So there's lots of different grain offerings. Is there like 3 or 4 pages of those? And then there's non-altar baked offerings. So a showbread, lechem, what is that? Lechem hapanim, like face bread. 2 loaves on Shavuot. Bread of thankful for Thanksgiving. So there's lots of offerings. Here's by different holidays. So for each holiday, let's just take the 4th day of Sukkot. You have 14 lambs, 2 rams, 10 bulls, and 1 goat. So, would you like fries with that? No. So there's a lot going on here. That was a world of animal sacrifice. Yes.
Once they sacrifice that, did they just leave the animals?
So typically, you wouldn't schlep the animal from your hometown. So you would go to the temple and you'd buy the animal. And because money in Roman times had pictures of Caesar on it, you're not allowed to make graven images. Anybody remember that particular commandment? You've probably heard of these guys, temple money changers. They weren't bad guys. They were necessary because you had to change to temple currency. Just like you go to Europe, you need euros. And then you would buy an animal, and it would be sacrificed by the priest. Yeah, Wow is right. I mean, yes.
So would it be, 14 lambs is a lot of lambs.
Yes.
So each person would be expected, or each household, or each?
Well, these are actually the occasions. So on the occasion of Sukkot, the temple hierarchy would offer these lambs. These weren't individual. Yeah, that's a great question. And I have to tell you, I am not particularly knowledgeable in this stuff because even if I were Orthodox, it still isn't relevant until the Messiah comes, 3rd temple is built, we may do sacrifices again. Send me an email, I'll let you know whether we got to go to Jerusalem and start sacrificing. Okay, so the role of the priest then in biblical Judaism is manyfold. Officiating at the sacrifices, blessing the people. We're going to see a blessing that the priests do and still do. sounding trumpets at festivals and new moons, blowing the shofar on the Yom Kippur of the Jubilee. Jubilee is the 50th year. So every year at the end of Yom Kippur, we blow the shofar, and we have a 2% chance of being right, because nobody knows when the Jubilee year is, so we blow it every year. Determining the will of God through the Urim and Thummim. That was like magical things on the breastplate of the high priest. And it was kind of like one of these magical 8 balls, you know, you turn it over, not now, try again later. And I don't think anybody really knows how it worked, but when the high priest would inquire of God for a particular decision, that's apparently what that was used. There's all kinds of controversy about that. Determining the fate of a woman suspected of adultery. The soda test is a question. I'm sorry? Well, I'll take them now as long as you don't run out on me. Yes?
Don't they blow the shofar on the Shabbat just before, done before?
Yeah, so there is a ceremony called Slichot, where we blow the shofar, and the tradition is on Rosh Hashanah, which is the Jewish New Year, we blow the shofar a lot. And I personally blow the shofar a lot. I have no idea. Yeah, do you have a question?
Since the Romans under Herod built such a magnificent Temple Mount area, why would we think that the Romans were the ones that destroyed it?
Oh, we know they were.
Well, do we though? Do we
Yes.
really? I mean, they were.
I don't know anyone that questions that, except you.
No, I think there are, and I've read about this for various factors within the Jewish community that were at war with each other. Right?
Yes, yes. Yes.
Whether the Romans deliberately set fire to the Second Temple is one thing, whether it happened as a result of,
Oh, the reason behind it is a different question. It's a great question. So yes, there were different sects of Judaism, and there was a group called the Zealots who wanted to revolt against Rome, and the Israelites were pretty safe inside the walled city of Jerusalem, and the Zealots destroyed the food and the water because they wanted people to go out and fight. So there's all kinds of interesting questions about what's the real reason behind the revolt, what's God's reason, but I don't know. I've never seen it seriously questioned whether it wasn't Roman legions doing the attacking. And they burned it, and remember, this is stone. So they set fires that were hot enough for the limestone to explode. And you can go there and pick up the dust of Tisha B'Av. 24 hours from now, Jews still celebrate in mourning the occasion of the destruction of the temple, which is the 9th day of Av, first temple, second temple. The tradition is that the temple was destroyed on that day, and it's actually a 24-hour fast. It begins tomorrow night. Treating eruptions of the skin, clothing, and buildings, preserving traditions, and instructing the people. That's the role of the priest in biblical times. In Rabbinic Judaism, only a few of these roles still take place to this day. So first, the son of a priest is a priest. Judaism traditionally goes through the mother's line, but whether you're a priest or not goes through your father's line. In a traditional synagogue, not Reform, but in conservative and Orthodox synagogues, the first person called to the Torah is a Kohen, a priest. The second person called for the ritual reading is a Levite, and then the rest of us get our turn. A priest to this day cannot come in contact with death. So, for example, if a plane is transporting a corpse, a Kohen can't be on that plane. A Kohen can't go inside a cemetery. So family members of the priest's family are buried at the edges of the cemetery. So if you want to visit the stone, you don't actually have to come into the cemetery, and that's true to this day. So yes, that's a great question. The question is, why can't they come in contact with death? So here's my sense of what's going on here. The priest and the temple service are an antenna, a two-way antenna that connects the Israelites with God. And so there's lots of rules about how that antenna is supposed to work and be kept clean. And these laws relate to those rules. So, if you have an antenna on you remember rabbit ears and things? Well, you can't just build it any way you want. You can't make it out of plastic, for example. So there's rules about what you do to connect with God, and these rules still survive. And there are a lot of rules about purity, and the ultimate impurity in Judaism is death. A priest, a Kohen to this day, cannot marry a divorced woman, can't marry even his own ex-wife. If a Kohen is getting divorced from his wife, they're given special caution saying you can't remarry, because a priest is not allowed to marry a divorced woman or a convert. Priests bless the people. I'll talk more about that. There's a ceremony called the redemption of the firstborn, a Pidyan Haben, and they supposedly are keeping their skills up just in case the Messiah comes and we build the third temple. And the conservative movement has relaxed many of these restrictions on Kohanim, and the Reform movement basically has eliminated any distinctions between Kohanim and other forms of other Jewish traditions. So there is a priestly blessing. In English, may God bless you and protect you. May God's countenance shine upon you and be gracious to you. May God, with God's face lifted before you, may you be blessed with peace. We've actually found silver forms of this amulet from, I think, 300-400 BCE with these words on it. And so the priests bless, and the tradition is that they bless making the Hebrew letter shin with their fingers. And the story, which is really kind of fun, is that Leonard Nimoy, who was raised as an Orthodox Jew, when he was asked to invent a Vulcan blessing on site, it's a very profound experience of the priestly benediction. So he came up with a live long and prosper and half of a shin. So prayer. You guys have heard of prayer. Have you ever heard of this concept? People get together in a building, say this building, or a synagogue, or a mosque, and pray together. You've heard of this idea, right? That does not exist in the Hebrew Bible. There is not one example of communities getting together to recite a liturgy, to recite prayers. Not one example. The priestly blessing, the one that I just mentioned, is the only documented community prayer, and that's not the community getting together to pray. The priests are blessing the community. There was a tradition of the Levites chanting psalms in the temple, but again, not really prayer. We see the patriarchs talking to God, blessing their children, but no formal prayer, no getting everybody together for a prayer service. The Song of the Sea, when the Israelites get through the Sea of Reeds and the Egyptians are drowned, there's a song, but it's an exaltation of praise. It's not organized liturgy. We see prophets and kings making requests of God, but not one example of community liturgical prayer. By the way, it's the prayer you say before drinking water. All those prayers, nowhere in the Hebrew Bible. That's all rabbinic. Yes?
The community was never allowed inside the temple. Only the high priests were allowed.
Yeah, so there are different areas in the temple which were accessible to different people at different times. So there was an area everyone could go into, any I presume, Israelite. There was a women's area, there was a men's area, there was an area where Levites could go, there was an area where priests could go, and then the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, only the high priest, only on Yom Kippur afternoon, to recite God's actual name. So there's sort of a hierarchy. One of the reasons I thought it would be interesting to have a Greek Orthodox priest is that in a Greek Orthodox church, they do some of that. There are areas on the I was going to say bima, on the stage where only the priests can go and regular folks can't go. Whoops. funny, light went off, but I don't think I did it. Okay, so some prohibitions in Biblical Judaism. On Sabbath, there's prohibition against, we say work, but it's malacha. So there's work that's called avodah. There's different Hebrew words for work. We don't necessarily know what those mean. The Mishnah that I told you, the Talmud explains it. And we're told the Sabbath should be a day of delight, without much detail. There's holidays. There are 3 so-called pilgrimage festivals. The word for a pilgrimage festival is Chag, and the Arabic form of that is Hajj, because it's a pilgrimage. So on these festivals, you were supposed to go to Jerusalem. Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, Tabernacles, Shavuot, I can't even remember what you call it, Pentecost, I guess. And you had to go to the temple in Jerusalem, so you couldn't live all over the world, because you were supposed to go every year. It wasn't like in the Arab world today, Hajj is something you might do once or maybe a few times in your life. This was required of every Jew during these holidays. On the first day of the 7th month, we're told it's a day of sounding the shofar. These days we call that Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the year. The word Rosh Hashanah is never in the Hebrew Bible. And on the 10th day of the 7th month is a day of atonement. Dietary laws, kosher laws. Meat, you can only eat animals, that should be cud. You can only eat animals that have split hooves and chew their cud. And there's a couple of animals specifically pointed out, like the pig. Pig has split hooves but doesn't chew its cud. And the rabbit, I think, chews its cud but doesn't have split hooves. For fish, fins and scales, both are required. So you have, shrimp and lobster and shark and other things are not kosher. Birds, there's a list. There are no birds of prey on the list. By and large, if something can eat you, it's probably not kosher. Not a good idea to eat it first. There's only one kind of bug that's kosher. There's a particular form of locust that's kosher, and thankfully no one seems to know exactly what that is. And you're not allowed to cook a baby goat in its own mother's milk, which is pretty bizarre. Where would this idea occur to you? Some scholars believe that it was a form of Canaanite idol worship. And you don't eat blood. Blood is the life force. You don't mix blood with your dinner. So then the rabbis in Rabbinic Judaism are going to add a lot. They're going to, in addition to which animals are kosher, they're going to describe how you slaughter the animal in a painless, humane way. And also you inspect the animal for lesions and other problems that might be in the animal. There's a greater separation of milk and meat. The rabbis say, what's this story with the baby goat and its mother's milk? And they come up with the idea that we don't have any meat with any milk. I once saw I guess it was a cartoon. Moses is on Mount Sinai, and God says, thou shalt not cook a baby goat in its mother's milk. And Moses says, oh wait, you mean you don't want us to eat any meat with any milk at all? And God says, thou shalt not cook a baby goat in its own mother's milk. And Moses says, oh, you want us to have 2 completely separate sets of dishes for meat and dairy? And God says, thou shalt not cook a baby goat in its mother's milk. In the Bible, it's mentioned 3 times. And Moses says, oh, you want us to wait 4 hours after eating meat that we can eat milk? And God says, have it your way. So the rabbis add all these laws about separate. Get that blue dye. It actually comes from a shellfish of all things, which wouldn't be kosher to eat. But now you can buy tzitzit with the blue thread. And there's specific rules about how you tie them. The Bible doesn't tell you. So the Ashkenazi way of tying it is you make a double knot, you wrap around 7 times. You can see here, whoops. Where am I? Yeah. You can see that there's coils here. And it's actually kind of a fun way of doing like a barrel stitch, different numbers. That's a Sephardic way of tying tzitzit. So double knot, 7 coils, double knot, 8 coils, double knot, 11 coils, double knot, 13 coils, double knot, and then 8 threads. There is a reason behind this. But if I tell you the reason, I have to circumcise you. So no, it's Kabbalistic, it's mystical, it's really interesting. But again, we'd be here all night if I were going through this. And so here is a good picture of a soldier at prayer. So these are tefillin or phylacteries. Inside these boxes are those verses. There's 7 coils here. This actually makes the letter shin, and there's a dalet and a yud. I mean, it's very involved. It's very symbolic, and it's pretty cool actually. And we find tefillin from the 1st century. So we actually find it from Bar Kokhba revolt and at Qumran. So we know that these tefillin were used, and I think they're referred to in the New Testament, the phylacteries and fringes. And so here's a modern set of tefillin, and I have, in my bag there, a set of tefillin that look exactly like those. And a mezuzah is hung on the doorpost, so there is a scroll with the part of the Torah that says, here are some words, put them on your doorposts and your gates. And almost always they have the Hebrew word Shaddai, which is what, we were making the letter Shin. Shaddai is one of the names of God, usually translated as Almighty, but Shaddayim can mean mountains and it can mean breasts. So there's sort of an interesting feminist take on this, that it's a nurturing aspect of God. It can also be an acronym like NASA, Shomer Daltot Yisrael, the guardian of the doorways of Israel. So here is the second family putting up a mezuzah on the vice president's residence. I think we're getting close to the end here. Yes?
Rabbi?
Sorry? Yes. So there was an argument. Actually, I found other explanation, but the one I remember is an argument whether you should hang it vertically or you should hang it horizontally, and on this one, they could compromise. So the tradition is, as you enter, right side of the doorpost, at an angle at a place you can touch, and when you enter and you leave, you touch the mezuzah and bring your fingers to your lips. Mezuzah traditionally should be on every room in your house, with the exception of bathrooms and storage rooms. I would say many people just have them on the front door. Very good question. So the other thing that's going on with Rabbinic Judaism is the rabbis. Now, the rabbis are the rabbis of the Talmud. This is after the temple is destroyed. They have this sense of, in the Torah, we are supposed to be a holy people, a holy nation, and a kingdom of priests. So there's this concept which is called a mikdash me'at. Mikdash is a tabernacle, me'at means small. So the home becomes a small temple, and even the synagogue becomes kind of like a hint of the temple. So Jewish law is observed in the home that have their inspiration in the temple, ritual washing of hands before meals, having salt with 2 chalot, those are like the showbreads that we had in the temple. Passover and holidays become home-based. In temple times, they would have been based in the temple. And then the synagogue, prayer, performance, mitzvot, sacred text, take the place of sacrifice. So there were 3 sacrifices a day. Now traditional Jews have 3 prayer services a day, and specifically one prayer called the Amidah, which in typical Jewish simplicity is also known as the Shemona Esrei, which means 18, and of course it has 19 sections. So come back next week and I'll explain why. And of course, things are holy. The Ark is holy. Torah scrolls are holy. In the Bible, there are no Sabbath candles or a ceremony called Havdalah at the end of the Sabbath. Group community prayer, I emphasize that a lot. Hanukkah is only in the Talmud. There are no rabbis. There are no details of all the Jewish law. There's no details of what you're supposed to believe. There's no mention or discussion of an afterlife. There's no yarmulkes or kippot, and there's no blessings of daily life. The Jewish world is filled with saying blessings over bread, over wine, over water, over seeing a beautiful sight in nature, seeing a beautiful person seeing a particularly ugly person, there's a blessing. Seeing a scholar of Torah, there's a particular blessing. Seeing a secular scholar, scientist, there is a blessing. Seeing a king who has a power of life and death. Not all kings do. Sorry, Charlie. Doesn't have that power, but the king of Morocco, you cross the king of Morocco, you are in deep trouble. In the Bible, there are no rules for how to conduct a wedding. The Bible 7 times says when a man takes a woman to be his woman, really, to be his wife, but there's no details on how to do it. By the way, there are some details on how to do a divorce. That's kind of interesting. There's no rules for how to conduct a funeral. There's no rules for conversion to Judaism. By and large, conversion to Judaism is hinted at in the book of Esther, but no discussion of any kind of details. There's no rules for religious services, daily, Shabbat, holidays, and no mention of the Messiah as a future Redeemer. The Hebrew word, the English word Messiah, is a translation of the Hebrew word Mashiach, which means anointed. The kings were anointed. Even Charlie, Prince Charles, had holy oil poured on his head. The verb to anoint is Mashach. Someone who is Mashach is Mashiach. That word occurs all the time in the Bible. It never refers to a future Redeemer. By the way, we were talking about the translation to Greek. When the Hebrew Bible is translated into Greek, they had to come up with a Greek word for Mashiach. That Greek word is Christos, which is where we get the word Christ. So here are some elements of biblical Judaism that are not part of Rabbinic Judaism, the Judaism that I practice, but are part of Christianity. Certainly the role of the priesthood. Priests, particularly in the Catholic world, play a very significant part. In fact, no Catholic priests, I don't know how you can observe Catholic tradition if you don't have anyone that can consecrate the wafer. And speaking of the wafer, the concept of sacrifice as a path of redemption by participating in the sacrifice of Jesus with consumption of Jesus' body and blood. Again, going back to original sin, not considered to be a sin in Judaism. But what do you do for the worst sin in the world? You got to have the best sacrifice in the world. Thinking biblically Jewish, what's the best sacrifice in the world? God become human. So it makes perfect sense from a biblical Jewish point of view, but it's not part of Judaism. Areas of churches that are particularly sanctified in a way remind us of the temple, the altar, screens, and so on in Orthodox Christianity. So here are some bottom lines. If the goal of the Hebrew Bible was to make the world Jewish, God is doing terribly. God is batting 2. 0.2% of the world are Jewish. But if the goal, and 2% of the United States is Jewish, this shocks many people. I'd love to go and ask people what fraction of the world and the country do you think is Jewish? I get estimates as high as 25-40%. If the goal of the Hebrew Bible is to bring the world to acknowledge and worship the God of Abraham, in the words of Isaiah, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all people, it is a huge success because about half the people in the world worship the God of Abraham. By far more Christians and Muslims. Okay, so I'm going to do some show and tell. This, I think, is very exciting. Hopefully we can do this without breaking it. So, on one of my trips to Israel, I bought, and I have with me, a oil vial and an oil lamp. Did I just kill this? I did. Oh, sorry. From First Temple Times. And if you want to come up afterwards, you can actually touch this and hopefully not break it. So this is actually somewhere about 2,500 years old. And I love just to think about it and think that some guy made it. And it's probably, I really don't know, probably a traveling kit. I bought it from a, supposedly authentic dealer, and it's exactly the same as what I'm showing you on there. Just for fun of it, I decided to go online and see if I could find something. So here's an auction starting at $100. So this is not, super valuable, but this is from First Temple Times. Unlikely that it was actually used at the temple. So I will have that up here if people are interested in seeing it. And I don't know what I do with my clicker. Well, I can do it. Thank you.
Rabbi Michael, just as a side note, our priests carry the vessels, a pattern for the host, and
Right.
a little chalice. It's
Right.
called, you know. it's
Yeah, so it's not-
kids,
sort of
they carry
similar.
with them, so that puts me in mind of the same.
Yeah, but it's probably not likely that these were necessarily religious articles. This may have been a traveling kit. You're camped out for the night, and you want to have a light. This is a candle. There were no candles in these times, so I'm not going to claim that this is some sacred thing. And then the other thing I have, which is far less expensive, is a copy of a book I wrote called A Christian's Guide to Judaism, and I have a few of them up here. They are available for $15. And then now it's your turn. Questions, and I hope answers. Okay, so that's the talk, and I'm happy to entertain questions.
Rabbi, what is the belief of the afterlife?
So the question is, what is the belief of the afterlife? People will often ask me, what do Jews believe about the afterlife? And my response is, I don't know, go ask them. I can tell you what Judaism teaches about the afterlife, and on my website, which is just lotker.com, I have a class on it. And the answer is many things, from resurrection. You heard of resurrection? Reincarnation, which is entirely inconsistent with Jewish and Muslim belief, I have come to understand. Communication between worlds. There's lots of things. Suffice to say, Judaism is very focused on this life. We believe God has given us God's world to take care of, and we trust God to take care of us in the next world, but the focus is on this life. But in terms, a broad concept is Jews are told what to do, not what to believe. You want to believe that God is an old guy sitting on a cloud in heaven. You want to believe in 7 levels of heaven. You want to believe in resurrection. You want to believe in reincarnation. Have fun. But put up those mezuzahs, say the blessing, give to charity. The Judaism's focus is on what we do much more than what we believe, which is one of the reasons I love Judaism, is I can't always control what I believe, but hopefully I can control what I do. So whenever you ask a question, what do Jews believe, my instinctive answer is, I don't know, go ask them. Other questions? Here, and there's also some in the back over there.
You spoke several times about the third temple, and you spoke of it in terms of it being a building. But isn't it true that there are many Jews that don't think of it as a physical structure, but think of the state of Israel symbolically as representing third temple? I remember that during the Yom Kippur War, which was 1974, I believe was, 73, thank you, the story that the generals came in to see Golda Meir and said, Mr. Prime Minister, the third temple is under attack. It's under threat right now. Isn't that still the case?
Yeah, so I have to tell you, I've never heard that. And I talk to a lot of Jews, but I've never heard of people thinking of the state of Israel as the third temple. Typically, the third temple is a vision of Ezekiel. In the book of Ezekiel, there's a description of the third temple. The thing that you hear more is that the state of Israel is the birth pangs of the coming of the Messiah. So when Israel was being formed in 1948, there was a controversy about whether anyone other than the Messiah is allowed to form the third commonwealth. Because you have Israel, you need a king, king's anointed, Messiah. So the belief amongst many traditional Jews was that only the Messiah can form a state of Israel. And Ben-Gurion needed to get the support of the Orthodox community as well as secular. And the founders of Israel were secular. They were not religious at all. So they actually, one Rabbi Cook, who was the chief rabbi of what was then called Palestine, came up with this idea that founding the state of Israel is beginning the birth process of the Messiah. But there are still ultra-Orthodox Jews that burn the Israeli flag every year on Israel Independence Day. because they don't believe that, and they're happy to accept money from the state and not have to serve in the army and so on, because they don't believe that anyone other than the Messiah can create a state of Israel. And then the question is, will the third temple be built? What will be the sacrifices? Because if everything's great, what are we going to sacrifice? So there are some authorities that will say, we'll only have sacrifices of well-being. Some authorities say the only holiday will be Purim, which is a happy, silly holiday. And if you ask me the question, what will happen, I have a very simple answer that I can answer, that I use to answer any question which is too deep theologically for me to address. And that answer, you can use this yourself, is God knows. Yeah. Question in the back. Yes.
If I can regress back to the earlier question about afterlife, I'm just kind of like from Greek philosophy, I'm curious on the telos, on the end, because it kind of dictates how we process or live things
I can't quite understand what you're saying.
So the question, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's my hearing problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the afterlife.
Yes.
With the question of afterlife, I'm curious on if we don't really know what the end is, right? Then why play the game, right? So is there some at least some general understanding of afterlife, like there is a meeting of the one true God, or there is a relationship with God, or especially if you have different...
Yeah, so the question is, why serve God? Why bother if we're not focused on the afterlife? And that's another huge difference between Judaism and Christianity. In Judaism, we serve God because we love God. There's a specific phrase in the Mishnah, in the Pirkei Avot, which says, don't be like the servant who serves the master in the hopes of reward. Be like the servant who serves the master due to the love of the master. So the answer is, from a Jewish perspective, we do these mitzvot because God has given us an unbelievably robust wealth of blessings, and out of love and appreciation, we do what we can do for God. Resurrection, heaven, hell, all of these beliefs exist. And some of them are really interesting. So here's an interesting one. There is a hell called Gehenna, and it's like a purgatory, but the maximum sentence is 1 year. And the good news is you get Shabbat off. So every night, Friday night, the gates of hell are open, and people go up north to sit in the snow for obvious reasons. And then as Havdalah is, the end of the Sabbath is coming, you got to go back to hell. And for those of you who are Jewish and know about Havdalah, one medieval, this is the most obscure thing I know, one medieval thought about why we smell the spices, you know about smelling the spices on Havdalah, is because the sulfurous furnaces are being fired up again in Gehenna, and we want to smell sweet smells so we don't have to smell the sulfurous furnaces. And 1 year maximum, except for certain offenses. Oh, by the way, what's the punishments? And very much in the words of Gilbert and Sullivan, the punishment fits the crime. So for people who are vain about their hair, they are hung by their hair. For people who indulge in gossip, they are hung by their tongue. And I'm not going to speculate what certain sexual crimes might have in store for you. But don't worry, it's only a year, except for certain crimes like, and I can't imagine anybody doing this, imagine calling people insulting names. Can you imagine anyone doing that? Certainly not in public, right? There's a medieval teaching that you're sentenced to Gehenna forever for humiliating people, in particular by calling them insulting names, also by pronouncing God's actual name and denying that the Torah is from God. So there's certain super crimes for which it's life without parole. But still, I think you get off on Shabbat. But the basic idea, this world focus, we do it for the love of God. Yes?
I just need some clarity around some of the stuff you said earlier. So the oral tradition that was written down after the destruction of the Second Temple, that became the Talmud, yes?
Yes, Mishnah and Talmud.
Mishnah, okay. But many of the things that define rabbinic Judaism are from the Talmud, yes?
Yes.
So could it have been that these things that we call distinctly rabbinic Judaism actually did occur during the time of biblical Judaism too?
So
they were practiced by me? Yeah.
The teaching is, the myth is, and we're sticking to it, that when Moses got the revelation on Sinai, so this is pre-temple times, 1200 BCE, Moses was given both the written revelation and the oral revelation. So the seeds of all that stuff were given to Moses, and I think of it as, in case of fire, break glass. In case of destruction of the temple, break the glass and start studying this. So that's the myth. Because otherwise, how could the rabbis have the chutzpah to reform Judaism? I mean, really what happened with the destruction of the temple is Judaism is reformed. It's biblical Judaism is formed into rabbinic Judaism and, oh, by the way, Christianity. So where do they get the permission, the chutzpah to do this? The permission, the chutzpah, comes from the idea. Everybody know what chutzpah is? Chutzpah is outrageous nerve or gall. The best example is somebody kills both of his parents and puts himself in the mercy of the court because he's an orphan. That's chutzpah. So where do the rabbis get the outrageous chutzpah to reform Judaism? Due to the myth that all of this stuff was given to Moses on Sinai and sort of held in abeyance for 1,200, 1,400 years. Yes?
Did rabbinic Judaism start in Israel, and how?
The rabbinic, yes. Rabbinic Judaism started in Israel,
after the destruction
and how?
of the temple. Yeah.
Yes, although there's evidence that synagogues, the word synagogue is a Greek word. It means house of meeting. In Hebrew, we call it Beit HaKnesset. There are evidence for synagogues preceding the destruction of the Second Temple. So clearly this idea, my own guess on this, is that with the Jews being carted off to Babylon and then going to Egypt, what we call the diaspora, in Hebrew it's called the galut, with the Jews being spread all over the world, the question is, how are we supposed to be Jewish in Babylon, in Egypt, in Greece, and so on, in Rome? And so these ideas started then. And once the temple is destroyed, there's nothing else. So I would say biblical Judaism probably rabbinic Judaism coexisted in some form with biblical Judaism. But once the temple is destroyed, there really is no role for biblical Judaism. Yeah, Keith.
Rabbi Lotker, I was going to ask the question, why did Judaism go from a religion of seemingly almost no rules of no rules, very few rules, to a religion of a bunch of rules? But you actually did answer that question in a lot of different ways. So I want to ask, which is the easier religion to follow? Biblical Judaism or present Judaism?
Well, one of the really interesting things is nobody really knows what the average Jew did during biblical times. It's almost impossible to think about this, but Jews by and large were utterly uninterested in history. The history for traditional Judaism is God gives the land to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We build a temple. The temple's destroyed. Someday the temple will be rebuilt. Any questions? So we don't know what the average guy living, in Modi'in, somewhere out in the boonies, was doing during biblical times. We get delicious hints from the Talmud. So the Talmud will give lots of rules about weights and measures and how to keep them, honest and so on. So in all of that discussion, and the Talmud is extensive. The Talmud is in translations like 70 volumes. So it's extensive. So there's lots of rules about merchants. So we get an insight into what the mercantile world was in the time of the rabbis, not in biblical times. There's very little information. We really don't know much about what it was like to be a Jew in biblical times. I came across very recently an archaeological investigation of the question, there's rules in the Bible about keeping kosher. about putting on the tefillin, about putting on the prayer shawls and other things, and immersing yourself in a mikveh for spiritual purity. So the question is, in temple times, how widely were those rules observed? And the interesting thing is, there's archaeological evidence which would, you examine cities, and what are you looking for? You're looking for pig bones. Okay, you know from medicine or biology, pig bones are different. You can identify the animal. You're looking for tefillin. We saw one from the 1st century. You're looking for mikvahs, where people immersed for ritual purity. And what this scholar, this is a book that just came out within the last year, what he finds is around the time of the Maccabees, so like 2nd century BCE, we start seeing cities, because you can date these findings typically by pottery. Pottery styles change with the times. So what he is finding, can't find it in text, because there's no text saying, oh, well, we didn't really worry about this until Judah Maccabee got on our case. But we can, through archaeology, I'm very interested in archaeology. Through archaeology, we can determine when the average Israelite town seemed to be observing rules in the Torah. And this is dietary rules, tefillin, or phylacteries, mikvaot, and there's a bunch of other things, amulets for the mezuzahs and so on. And it seems like in 2nd century, which is pretty late, 2nd century BCE, which is pretty late. So we really don't know prior. And basically what he also found was in Israelite cities, prior to this time, you would find pig bones and you would find evidence of other non-kosher animals. So he's drawing the conclusion, and he's a scholar, he's not a rabbi or anything, that probably the level of observance of the average Israelite was not very high until the time of the Maccabees, and maybe when they were being harassed by the Greeks. So that's sort of an interesting, fairly recent discovery.
An easy and a difficult.
Oh, you're so quiet. I'm going to come close to you.
Okay. What is current thinking about the Ark?
What is current thinking about the Ark? God knows.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, there's evidence that maybe it was taken to Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar. There's evidence that, the raiders, you have another question, raiders of the lost Ark. But there's some evidence about Ethiopia. So I see articles about it all the time, but I don't think anything definitive.
Thank you. Okay, some of you may want to close your ears. The kosher killing of animals.
Yes.
Please elaborate, especially the handling of blood.
Yes. So now nothing in the Bible. Nothing. The rabbis say with one stroke you need to sever, I think, the arteries and the spinal cord. So the animal is instantly dead. And then the blood needs to be drained. So you hang the animal and drain the blood. And then you butcher the animal. And then you're supposed to rub what is called kosher salt. You may have heard of kosher salt, because salt is hygroscopic. It draws liquid. So you salt the, let's say, beef to draw the blood out, and then you thoroughly cook it so it's well done. So salty, well done meat.
So
delicious.
So Rabbi, I'm going to ask this.
I'm sorry?
I've been dying to ask this question.
I'm sorry?
How long do they?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, that's an answerable question. You take a kosher butcher, but but you shouldn't have any blood.
So I couldn't have a rare steak. I have been wanting to ask this question since you talked about.
Yeah,
blood
I don't
on the
think a
screen.
rare steak would necessarily be kosher.
I could never be kosher.
Yes.
So.
Yes, I wanted to ask a question in light of the whole thesis of your talk, Biblical Judaism, an extinct religion. Because when I read through the Siddur, especially in the morning prayers, the prayers recount passages from the Torah describing sacrifices from Shemot to Vayikra, Devarim. And the notations in Art Scroll, Birnbaum, Siddur.
I got all the list of all the sacrifices from Art Scroll.
Yeah, right.
Traditional prayer book.
But they seem to be saying that when we recite these verses, it's as if we offered them.
It's as if we what?
It's as if we offered the sacrifices.
Oh, yeah. So what they're saying is...
Yes, so they're not saying they're extinct. It's almost like they still have
what they're saying
significance
is,
to us.
in place of offering animals, we're offering prayers. So they change it from the offering of our flocks to the offering of our lips. But there is a longing in traditional Judaism, give me that old-time religion, of wanting to have the temple restored. So, and you read the Talmud, there's a tremendous amount of material in the Talmud about the details of the sacrifice. And in the Siddur, in a traditional Siddur, not in Reform, there will be long discussions of sacrificial ceremonies. And on Yom Kippur, the afternoon service is just filled with what the sacrifice was on Yom Kippur. So in theory, we are clinging to the Torah, because the Torah says sacrifice animals. So I would say the position is we would love to sacrifice animals, but we can't. There's no temple. So instead of doing that, God told Moses on Sinai to start praying.
Or is it on hold?
Is Biblical Judaism is extinct or?
On hold.
On hold?
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. God knows. It's on hold till the Messiah comes. Now, what does that mean to you?
Hang on a second. She's going to ask a question, and then you, and then somebody else.
Two parts.
She has a two-part question.
Yeah.
I'm going to give you a three-part answer.
Okay. I love it. At first, and following up what you were saying.
Speak right into the microphone.
Isn't it said by the rabbis in the millennial age, or in the Messianic age rather, that the sacrifice that will be celebrated will be the Todah, the one of Thanksgiving.
The Thanksgiving offering. That's one of the ideas.
Bread and wine, right? That's the Todah.
I don't know if that's the Todah offering.
Yeah.
I just don't know.
And then the other thing, going back to the laws of being kosher with the meat, it's curious that you were talking about the salt, that process, they were obeying the process of how to do it out of obedience to a commandment, but the taking of the salt was actually also purifying and preventing disease.
Yes.
And then also the keeping of the milk and dairy, the time limits, is actually a health benefit of the fat content, which is why there are certain things that are really not kosher as far as the lobster, shrimp. Those are all, now we know, we have the scientific evidence that those are high in cholesterol. So although they were observing these things out of commandments, maybe the commandment was there to begin with because of a health benefit. And as far as the controversy with the meat being that plant-based meat and lab-grown meat are two different things.
Oh, very different.
Plant-based meat doesn't contain anything animal.
No, it's plants, right.
And the plant-based meat is kosher.
Yes.
So you can have that with a slice of cashew cheese on Fridays as well as that. And it's still, the fat content's great.
Yes.
And the controversy is, how does that appear to someone who's sitting there watching another person that is religious?
Okay, so you
and
have
then
more than a two-part question. Okay, so
they're taking a bite out of a cheeseburger when it's completely plant-based with cashew cheese. It's healthy as all get out.
Okay, let me answer.
Let
me answer. Okay, so a big question which people discuss all the time is the reason for the kosher laws health-based or just God-based? And there's controversy even among the rabbis. But I would say the prevailing opinion is if you make it health-based, then it just reduces the Torah to a science textbook. And then also, well, I'm telling you, you may not agree with it. And then also, if it's health-based, and now we know how to cook pork, does that mean we can eat pork? And I have a one-word refutation of the idea that kosher is health-based. And you may not know this word. It's schmaltz. Anybody know what schmaltz is? Schmaltz is roasted, fried chicken fat. It's hard to imagine anything that is more kosher and less healthy. But the issue really is, God gives us commandments. There's actually a hierarchy. There are commandments that God gives us. Thank you very much, God. We could have figured this out ourselves. Don't murder. And by the way, it's not don't kill, it's don't murder. Don't steal. Thank you very much. We could have figured that out. There are other commandments. Brilliant. We wouldn't have thought of it literally in 10,000 years. Shabbat. Shabbat is brilliant, but nobody ever thought of it before. Now that we have it, it's fantastic. We're delighted. Then there's another category of commandments where we still don't know the reason behind it, and nobody can figure it out. You're not to wear a garment of wool and linen mixed. It's called shatnez. It's specific in the book of Deuteronomy. Why? Nobody has the foggiest idea. And one of my teachers, who's something of a mystic, says those are the sweetest commandments of all. And the way I think about it is, my late wife loved yellow roses. I don't know why she loved yellow roses. I could patiently explain to her that pretty much the same as yellow roses, or even better, daisies, which are one heck of a lot cheaper than yellow roses, roughly the same spectrum, same color. I could patiently explain those things to her. But she loves yellow roses. I love her. She wants yellow roses. I buy her yellow roses. From that, if God tells us not to wear a garment of linen and wool, we don't have the foggiest idea. Why? Milk and meat, salting everything. We don't have, some we can dream up ideas, some we have no clue. But God loves us, we love God, God gives us, surrounds us with blessings and gifts. God doesn't want me to wear a garment of wool and linen. By the way, I wouldn't know wool and linen if I tripped over it, so I don't worry about that particular commandment. But that is the traditional response to that.
So just to let you know, we need to be closing. If you are welcome to leave if you need to, but please leave us a survey if you have one. Thank you.
Yeah, and I have to leave in 24 hours because that's Tisha B'Av.